In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. Oh, I'm a child of God. Oh, I am.
So we trust you, Lord. For we trust in our God,
Trust you.
and through his unfailing love, we will not be shaken. We will not be shaken. We will not be shaken. Yeah, wherever you're listening to right now, sing this with us. For we trust in our God, and we aim our hearts to you. And through his unfailing love, we will not be shaken. We will not be shaken. We will not be shaken. Yes, God, because we look to you. You're the one in control. Yeah, we choose to worship you over fear. Yes, Lord. Though the battle rages, we will stand in the fight. Though the armies rise up against us on all sides, we will not be shaken. We will not be shaken. We will not be shaken. 'Cause you're our strength. For in the hour of our darkest days, we will not tremble, we won't be afraid. 'Cause hope is rising like the light of dawn. Our God is for us, he has overcome. shaken. We will not be shaken. No, we will not be shaken. For we trust in our God. Yes, and through His unfailing love, we will not be shaken. We will not be shaken. No, we will not be shaken. Trust you, Lord.
You tell mountains they must fall, and they fall. You tell oceans to be still, and they're calm. You tell sickness it must leave, and it's gone. In my weakness, God, I know you are strong. You are the one above it all. I stand in awe of the
we as a church, we take the second Sunday of every month and we talk about marriage. And here's what we believe about marriage. Number one, marriage should be honored by all and the marriage bed kept pure. That's Hebrews 13:4. We believe that whether you're young or old, married or single, we're all called to esteem marriage as highly valuable. We're to paint this beautiful picture of marriage for our children and for our singles and for our married couples. And so that's why we take the second Sunday of every month to paint this beautiful picture. Number two, we do not believe that God gave you your spouse to beat you down and suck the life out of you so you can be more like Jesus. We believe you can enjoy life and marriage simultaneously. You don't have to pick between the two. So that's Ecclesiastes 9:7-9. Go and eat your food with gladness. Drink your wine with a joyful heart, for now God favors what you do. Always be clothed in white and anoint your head with oil, speaking there of joy and festivity. And then it says in verse 9, enjoy life with your wife, whom you love, all your miserable days. So life can be a challenge. Life can be difficult, but we believe you were given a spouse and you are blessed in marriage to have someone to go through the grind with. So part of painting the beautiful picture of marriage at this church is that we don't lead out with marriage is hard. Most marriage series and messages lead out with this. It's painful, it's difficult, it's grueling, but this is how God intended it. No, we believe that you can enjoy marriage. And then the third part is based on Genesis 2:24, and that is, for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two become one flesh. We believe that marriage should be prioritized in the home. The bond between a husband and a wife is to be stronger than the bond between a parent and a child. Our children are growing up and they are leaving home. So we want them to leave home. That's a sign of good parenting. And we want to make sure we have something to give them and to bless them with. And the greatest gift we believe you can give a child is a mom and a dad who love each other and enjoy life together. Today, TwoIgnite Sunday, we always try to hit it from an angle where singles are encouraged and couples are encouraged. This may actually lean more towards singles preparing for marriage, but it's going to have illustrations of couples married, because we're going to tackle today this subject that we are obsessed with in our culture, compatibility and chemistry. And to be honest with you, we've got it all wrong. Okay, so here's what we're going to blow out of the water today. We're going to dive deep into the issue of compatibility and chemistry, because one of our passions here, again, my passion is to not tell young people, wait to get married till you're 30 or 40 until you figure it out. And we tell them, don't wait, stop, quit it, don't touch. And we give them purity talks, but we don't teach them how to form relationships. We don't walk them through the steps. And so young people today are scared to death of relationships, and so they don't define them. And whatever this is falls apart, they won't hurt so bad. It's a coping mechanism for the younger generation. And so part of our TwoIgnite Sunday is to help young people form relationships. So if you're single, if you're a teen, if you're a young 20-something, this is a very important message for you, because you're bombarded almost daily with this idea of a match. Got to find the right match. You got to find the perfect person. You got to have all of these character traits and personality traits that you check off the box. And I just found people walking away from a potential marriage because there are check boxes that I don't think necessarily and biblically need to be checked. We way over somebody with a list. So here's where we're starting. A good match is a good start. You have things in common. A profile, think about it. If online daters, you're getting matched up by an algorithm. An algorithm is matching you up. It can be a good start, but don't hold on to that for success in your marriage. Don't like cling to that as I've got to have the good match to have the good start in order to have a lifelong marriage, because it will never sustain a thriving marriage. A good match is a good place to start. Only character does that. Only character sustains and grows and builds a thriving marriage. Okay? So, we believe that character trumps compatibility, character trumps chemistry and compatibility. Great marriages prioritize character over compatibility. So if you're searching, if you're in the search right now, this is where you want to start and spend your time, not here. Okay, you may be attracted to the person, you may have things in common, but you want to start doing the important inspecting. So when we built our home 7 years ago, there was this ginormous 100-year-old oak tree that we built the whole home around. But the problem was I didn't inspect it before we built, and the thing was hollow. And every night we'd start hearing boom, 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 boom. I'm like, what is that? It's called branches falling on the roof. right? The thing was falling apart. I brought a tree inspector out, and he looked at it, and he's like, oh, do not allow the kids to play around this tree. They'll die. That's what we had. It was gorgeous, but it was dying, dead, hollow, nasty. So some of you are looking for that beautiful oak of a man. You like how I did that? And then a year or two in, you find out this guy's hollow. This guy ain't got nothing. What did I do? In dating, in early relationship formation, prioritize character. And here's what the research shows. This is very important to understand. Happy couples, divorced couples. Okay, so you see a happy couple in here, and you know someone then also that may be divorcing. They scored similarly in their happiness as newlyweds. Okay, so it's not about, oh, they got a better start, that's why they're happy, than we did. No, it's not how you start. So I love what one guy I read this week said. Don't even use the term soulmate until you've been married 30 years. And look at all the seniors are going, that's right. I see a senior lady back there going, yep. You don't know the person. That's what I love when I'm with Gary Smalley. He tells people, he goes, oh, man, you really don't start having fun in marriage till about year 45. You put up with all this stuff in the first 45 years, and you learn how to get along, and then you hope God gives you health to enjoy 10, 20 years as soulmates. But don't even start using the terminology soulmate until you've been married 30 years. So let's look at compatibility and chemistry, and then we're going to dive into the scripture. Compatibility, and then we're going to look at its not-so-distant cousin, chemistry. Compatibility does not hinge on some personality or personal inventory of traits. So some of you, you're bringing in a list, or you put your list online, and the algorithms now are running out there and matching you up and checking it out. It doesn't hinge on that. Compatibility isn't something you have, it's something you make. It's something you create through shared experiences in marriage. It's a process, one that you negotiate as you go along, again and again. It's a disposition, an attitude, a willingness to work. So one of my favorite stories about compatibility, dear friends of mine at Woodland Hills, John and Heather Jenkins. So they're newlyweds. They're passionate about the outdoors. They go up to the Northwest. John loves fly fishing. Heather came in alongside of him, loved doing the fly fishing with him. We did fly fishing a few times together before we all had kids down at Taneycomo. But they go up to the Northwest. They take all their gear, and they're in this stream. And John describes this stream to me. It's this beautiful, it meanders through the landscape. He said, but it feels like it's in a ditch, because the sides just come down like this to this creek. So you basically slide down into the water, and then you're fishing. And he said, we could enjoy this for hours. And so they're fishing, enjoying life together. And they turn the corner on this creek, and they both are standing face to face with a moose. Now, you don't know someone until you're standing face to face with them, shoulder to shoulder with a person looking at a moose. And the moose was happy. You see all the, have you been around a moose? I've seen them in the zoos. They're unbelievable. I don't go out to scary places to look at them. I stick to where they're behind. Oh, look at them on the glass. So, but they're huge, and they got racks that are humongous. And this one, he said, has the moss and stuff hanging off of it, and he's enjoying. But then he gets up and does what? I can't impersonate a moose snorting. But the moose gets ticked. Now they're in a life-threatening situation. I have to pause the story right there, because there's two endings of this story. There's a John version, and there's a Heather version. So I asked in the first service, I'm going to ask in the second service, how many of you want to hear John's version? Raise your hand. It's about 5 to 10%. How many of you want to hear Heather's version? Raise your hand. John? He's in Kansas City this morning. That's about 90%, I'm guessing. So we're going to go with Heather's version. They're face to face with the moose. He's snorting. They fear for their lives. This is how Heather tells the story. John turns to the bank, elbows her out of the way because he's reacting, and he's climbing up to the top of this deal, and Heather now is left to certain death. Now, I have to tell you John's side of it. John says he was doing that. But you know when your airplane has problems, right? What are you supposed to do when the mask falls out of the compartment? You put yours on first. Because if you're dead, you can't help anybody else. If you pass out, you can't help anyone else. John, in that moment, right, out of a love that a young husband has for his wife, immediately went to that scene in an airplane and thought, I got to get to the top of this bank so I can reach down and pull her up. That's what he says. Heather says, I've never seen him so giddy to save his own life in my life. Didn't look like it was coming back to help me. Why say that? You don't know a person until you're standing with them facing a moose. Think about that for just a second. You can date, you can talk over email, but you don't know a person's character until you're in a car with them, stuck on a highway in traffic for an hour and a half late to a flight. That's when you learn who the person is. How many, all the married people are going, yeah, the other ones are like, no, we love each other. We love each other. And that's why when premarital, I love premarital counseling. It's one of my favorite things to do, and I wish I had more time to do it. I don't, and Ryan Pinnell does it all now. But I said it was my favorite thing, Ryan, when they would come in, sit down, and be like, hey, tell me about your last fight. Well, that's what's amazing. We don't fight. We don't fight? Okay, all right, well, let's talk about maybe what possibly might you fight about, in the early years of marriage. Well, they look at each other and they're like, it's something we've talked about that. We don't see any potential conflict. You know what they need? A moose. They need a traffic jam. They need a medical bill that they can't cover. They need a mortgage from a home that they're upside down in. They need children. When you start bringing all that into the equation, now we're going to see a person's character. This is why character is so important. When you're up at 2 a.m., right, telling your wife to quiet down with the screaming baby, honey, keep it down. Trying to sleep in here. But when you're up at 2 a.m., husband and wife trying to negotiate that, you're not thinking about what bands you have in common. You're not thinking about what's your favorite food and that place we dated, that little pizza place we went. You're not thinking about all that. You're wanting to see, how does this person respond in conflict? That's how you make compatibility. That's how compatibility grows in marriage. You are negotiating, you are learning to cooperate together around shared experiences, and a lot of times it's going to be difficult and painful shared experiences. You can't talk about compatibility as a process without looking at chemistry, which is the not-so-distant cousin of chemistry, or of compatibility. Chemistry is an alluring concept. But much too frequently, people use it to absolve themselves of the need to consciously examine their approach to one another. In other words, have you ever met someone that says we're divorcing? The reason we're divorcing is because we have nothing in common. Really, and we say around here we have a lot of socially acceptable terms. Stress has become a socially acceptable term for anger. As we look at our young people leaving the home today, independence has become a socially acceptable term for selfishness, and we don't have anything in common is a socially acceptable term for we don't get along. We don't know how to get along. We've stopped getting along. Everything that hits us in life, we just turn from one another. We don't know how to be teammates. And really, the research behind all this shows us sensitivity to chemistry, like obsessing over chemistry, is in and of itself one of the factors that leads to divorce. Because we use it. We use it to say we're just not all that common. We don't have that much in common anymore. Like my wife, let me tell you, this is what I love. She's different 18 years into marriage than when I first married her. And how many of you, your wife or your spouse, they're different right now than when you first married them? Raise your hand. Raise it right now. Okay, thank you. All right, so I married a golden retriever. I married a people person. I married someone who, papers in college, I turned mine in a month early so the professors could read them and it could perhaps direct their teaching a little bit better. That was my thought. Amy did hers the night or two before and, again, did well on them, but her deal wasn't, that's just not the priority because relationships were a priority, far more than me. Then we get married. We start, in ministry. We're starting Woodland Hills. We're getting things going. And still that very highly relational golden retriever, loyal. But then we had these little critters called children. How many of you, your spouse changed when the children came along? Of course they did. Everything changed. And some of you are like, I know, I want my life back. I want my spouse back. But no, it's like, I'm now dating a new person. I'm married to a new person, so I got to get to know her all over again. We start reading books on parenting. Biggest mistake we ever made. We were awesome at it way before we read any books. That was sarcasm. So that she puts the kids on a schedule, everything's regimented, and I don't mind being reminded, that Amy will say to me, hey, make sure you go potty before we leave. Okay, I'm going potty before we leave. She's putting me, really a kid's schedule means a dad's schedule. And some of you are like, no, that's not the woman. Listen, the woman I married, that was 18 years ago. I've got a new woman. And I love it. And guess what? In a few years, the kids are going to leave the house. And guess what? What are we doing? We're going to Disney World. You've heard me say that. We're going to Disney World. And let me tell you, it's probably going to change. Many of you experience this, and those of you who've been married a lot longer than me, you're thinking back on the seasons of life. You're like, boy, yeah, he was like this at this point, and then she was like this at this point, and then we had this happen, and then I remember when her dad died, and when her dad died, man, things changed for many years. She spent time in mourning, and then this hit her, and then this hit her. She wasn't a family person until dad died, and now it's like we got to have a family reunion every 6 months, right? This is what happens. We change. Chemistry wanes. It moves. It flows, and I love it. I was telling her the other day, because one of the things in our home, when we got married, I loved fishing. And I got into fly fishing with John. Then we had kids, and that took us into a season where I don't get to. Now when Amy says, go fish, my first thought is, sounds like a lot of work. How many of you guys know what I'm talking about? You're like, I got to get all that garbage out of the garage and got to start tying up. By the time you get ready to go fishing, you're like, this is exhausting. I'm going to go inside. I don't want. But I said it's work. It wasn't 10 years ago because we didn't have kids and I had time to tie flies. I can't imagine sitting down right now and tying flies with kids and everything. I mean, it's totally different. I grew up, I told my mom this week, because we're coming out of this season of mourning with losing so many grandparents, but I just remember my mom coming in the house every day after work in a trench coat. We lived in Chicago, and from rain and snow and all of that, and she'd reach under the stove, which was right by our kitchen door, and she'd open up the broiler pan. How many of you remember that's where we stored all of our pots and pans, was the broiler pan. We didn't have cabinets for it, so you pulled out, she'd pull up a pot, put it on there. Before I left for school, she'd say, hey, get the meat out of the freezer. So meat was thawing. She'd take that pound of ground beef, styrofoam off of it, throw it in the pan, start cooking it up, take the box of Hamburger Helper. We were ready to go. I am passionate to this day about Hamburger Helper. I love Hamburger Helper. That's emotional linkage. How many of you were raised on Hamburger Helper? You loved it. Sunday was meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and corn. And then we went back to Hamburger Helper. And I told my mom this week, Mom, I just want to say thank you. I just remember how hard you worked, and then you'd come home, you'd put that pan, we would eat Hamburger Helper, and we'd get our chores done, we'd get everything done, schoolwork done, go to bed, get up the next day and do it all again. Okay, my wife, again, what she learned growing up and her emotional linkage is all about food with texture. Like a lot of food with different elements. And I still, to this day, when she says, I'm preparing a meal tonight, and I go into the kitchen, and I'm like, you used every pot, pan, and utensil we have in this house. I mean, who's coming? It's just us, but it's like, it's the sinks piled, and it's stored on the counter, and I'm like, there's 4 of us, and we've used every pot and pan, and I go, well, I'm going to start loading the dishwasher. No, I've already got it loaded. You've loaded that? Then that's how much stuff we used? I had a pot and 4 plates. That's what we had. So you bring all of that. Think about, you not only have the changing seasons now, but you bring all the truckload of emotional linkage from your childhood and from your past in. Yesterday, Corinne and I in the morning, we built a chicken coop. We're going to raise chickens. I've invested and completely bought into the redneck way of life. And so right there next to the garage, we're going to have a little farm. And we're putting the deal together, and I'm singing to Corinne the whole time. You don't have to be lonely at farmersonly.com. City folks just don't get it. I go, Corinne, you're going to marry a farmer, aren't you? She had her boots on, and her cowboy boots were on over her pants. She was loving life, and I'm like, I don't know if you can tell by looking at me, I ain't a farmer. Didn't spend a lot of time on a farm, but she's passionate about it. I go, Corinne, you may end up on a ranch. You may end up with a farm. I gave her this whole message in 2 hours of building a chicken coop, to which Amy wants me to be full of integrity this morning. It actually was assembling a chicken coop. She said, you can't really tell people you built it because when you see it, it's awesome. I bought it at Sam's in a box, but I used 4 tools. And in my mind, when you use 4 tools, you have built, not assembled. Do I have a witness? Okay. Assembled is that little hex key thing that they give you from IKEA. No, I built. I used a saw, a hammer, a drill, and a knife, and pliers. I did the whole thing. And Corinne's just watching. I said, if you marry a farmer, he'll be good at this type of stuff. Because the dowels weren't lining up in the holes just right, like from wherever it was made. And I go get me a hammer. Well, what are you going to do with the hammer? This is how you do it. Watch. And I just start knocking all the dowels off the deal. I put it together. I go, Corinne, this isn't your dad's specialty. I'm doing it because I love you, and I'm going to raise these chickens as if they were my own. I said, you're going to find somebody one day. But guess what, Corinne? Farmer, not the priority. Farmer's not the priority. You want someone who understands that chemistry and compatibility is something that you make together, and this is where we're headed with this. You want someone in their approach to you. It keeps you from opening your own heart, embracing an unwavering willingness to do the hard work of exploring, knowing, and respecting the other person. Corinne, that's what you want. You want someone who knows you, but more than that, and here's where we're going with this, who knows Jesus? This is the most important question you can ask about character. One professor put it this way: we never know whom we marry. We just think we do. Or even if we first marry the right person, just give it a while, and he or she will change. For marriage, being the enormous thing that it is, means we are not the same person after we have entered into it. The primary challenge of marriage is learning how to love and care for the stranger to whom you find yourself married. That's what makes marriage fun. Now, I've told you this before. One of the things I love, I'm talking about seasons. I'm not talking about the spouse who changes every day. Because one of the things I love, and I've told Amy this I don't know how many times, I love pulling in the driveway at night and saying, thank you, Father, because I know the woman I'm going to get. But I know people that pull in the driveway, men and women, husbands and wives. They pull in the driveway and they ask the question, I wonder which husband I'm getting tonight. Like, how do you love that person? How do you love that person? Well, this is where we're going. And here's the transition in the message. And Pastor Timothy Keller puts it this way: as we begin to see how to apply the gospel to our marriage and how the gospel fits into this whole conversation of compatibility and chemistry in marriage. Marriage success depends on factors that couples can do something about. And that's where we find great hope, right? This isn't about, oh no, who's this person going to be? There's something that you can do about this, and that's where we're going to head. And this is what Pastor Keller says. The reason that marriage is so painful and yet wonderful is because it is a reflection of the gospel, which is painful and wonderful all at once. The gospel is, and here's the gospel defined, and then we'll break it down into 3 points. We are more sinful and flawed in ourselves than we ever dared to believe, and at the very same time, we are more loved and accepted in Jesus Christ than we ever dared hope. This is the only kind of relationship that will really transform us. In other words, we're accepted by God because of Jesus. We don't accept our spouse, and the word accept in the New Testament means to move towards and lean into. We don't accept our spouse because of what season they're in right now. We don't accept our spouse by whether or not they like mountain biking or they've stopped in this activity and they're pursuing it. No, we accept our spouse because of Jesus. This is what a follower of Jesus does. This is what a Christian does. A Christian accepts other people as God has accepted us. God doesn't accept us based on our works. He doesn't accept us on our ability to keep to or hold to the law. He accepts us because of Jesus. And here's again how Timothy Keller breaks this down. If you were to have love without truth, which is what some people want in marriage, I don't want him to get into my business. I'm not going to get into his, but we're just going to love each other. And this would be the movie mentality. This would be the television mentality of love. Love without truth is sentimentality. It supports and affirms us, but keeps us in denial about our flaws. So we don't want that. So the opposite of this, we don't want this for our churches either, just to throw that in there. We don't want to be a church that's all about truth without love, because that's harshness. It gives us information, but in such a way that we cannot really hear it. This is why the gospel is what our marriage needs. God's saving love in Christ, however, is marked by both radical truthfulness about who we are and yet also radical, unconditional commitment to us. The merciful commitment strengthens us to see the truth about ourselves and repent. The conviction and repentance moves us to cling to and rest in God's mercy and grace. So if you go back with me, we need to go back to the fall just briefly here and look at Galatians. And here's how we defined the gospel. 3 parts. I'm a preacher. You get it in 3 parts. If you can't say it in 3 parts, it ain't true. So number 1, I am helpless and lost. There's nothing I can do to make myself acceptable to God. It's not about keeping the law. It's not about a cosmic scale at the end of life where there's a good side and a bad side, and hopefully I've done enough good stuff to weigh down this side. I've removed enough bad side that the scale tips. I'm helpless and lost. There's nothing I can do to make myself acceptable to God. Number 2, Jesus is my great rescuer. He rescues me. He breaks down the door from the place in which I'm held bondage called sin. He breaks down the door and he rescues me from my sin. And then the third most important part, God accepts the work of Christ on my behalf. Okay, so this is what the gospel does, and here's where we're going to take it to and close with today. The gospel, what we just looked at, brings natural enemies into community. Remember, we looked at this 2 weeks ago. D.A. Carson, theologian, said this: we here in the church, we are a band of natural enemies. We're a band of natural enemies. We shouldn't get along. There's so many reasons why you and I should not get along. It's personality driven, it's socioeconomics, it's ethnicity, it's culture, it's family backgrounds, it's the community in which you were raised versus the community in which I was raised, it's the denomination you were raised in versus the denomination I was raised in. There's so many reasons why we shouldn't get along. We're natural enemies. But the gospel, I'm helpless and lost. Jesus rescues me. God accepts the work of Christ on my behalf. That's how we accept one another. We accept one another because of Jesus. And we see this in Galatians 3:28. There is no longer Jew nor Gentile. There's no longer circumcised versus uncircumcised. There's no longer clean versus unclean. Jesus removes that. Okay? There's no longer slave nor free. There's no longer, poor and rich. There's no longer destitute, and no, Jesus removes that. There's no longer male and female. And by the way, just so you know, this is not a verse about, what complementarianism versus egalitarianism. This isn't a verse to be used to promote people in leadership, or it has nothing to do with that. This verse is all about the gospel. The gospel of Jesus, that God accepts the work of Christ on my behalf, is what brings all of these people who culture says shouldn't be together. They shouldn't get along. Jesus brings all of these people together. That's the whole point of this text. If you go back 1 chapter to Galatians chapter 2, we see a confrontation between 2 apostles, Paul and Peter. I love this confrontation and we looked at it in great detail, but it's this here played out when Peter was acting in line with the gospel. Then leaders from Jerusalem showed up and he stopped acting in line with the gospel. And it says this: for before certain men came from James, we believe this was a council that came from Jerusalem, Peter, Cephas, it says in the text, used to eat with the Gentiles. This is a big deal. Clean and unclean, sitting down and eating together. Why were they able to sit at a meal together, share a table together? It's because of Jesus. Peter understood the gospel. The confrontation that took place in Jerusalem in verses 1 through 10 of Galatians 2, you can read about that in Acts 15 as well. We see Peter preach this beautiful message about in Jesus, all of these walls come down. And what was happening in that day, you had the Judaizers coming in to brand new believers saying, yes, it's faith in Jesus, but you have to take on circumcision, you have to take on the clean laws. And what they were saying is, if you want to be a Christian, you must look like a Jew. And what the Judaizers were saying, if we're going to get along, think about this and how this plays out in our relationships today. If you and I are going to have chemistry, if we're going to get along together in community, they were telling the Galatian Christians, the Gentile Christians, you have to look like a Jew. It's the only way we're going to get along. Take on our customs, take on our rituals, take on the way we live. Isn't this how we live in marriage? If you and I are going to get along, I'm going to need you to start thinking like me. If we're going to get along, I need you to start acting the way I want you to act. It goes on to say, but when they arrived, when the peer pressure group arrived, he began to draw back and separate himself from the Gentiles. He didn't want to get into any trouble or be in contempt with them because he was afraid of those who belonged to the circumcision or the clean group. His hypocrisy ran so deep, it says other Jews joined him in his hypocrisy, so that by it, even Barnabas was led astray. And then we see in verse 14, I love this, because this is Paul. This is who he was. He was confrontational. He steps up and he delivers the punch. When I saw that they were not acting in line with the truth of the gospel, if ever there's been a great counseling verse, it's this right here. Because literally, this first part of chapter 2:14, acting in line with the truth of the gospel, it literally means ortho walking. Ortho, if we had any orthodontist in here, they would tell you it means to be straight. That's what you do. And he's saying, Peter, you have these convictions, but your life is not measuring up to it. So he's saying, ortho walking, we need to walk in line and in step with the gospel. I'm helpless and lost. Jesus rescues me from my sin. God receives the work of Christ on my behalf. But Peter, your behavior separating from unclean Gentiles is not in line with the gospel. You have to come back. You have to understand this truth. We drive a 2007 Dodge Grand Caravan. We're awesome. Okay, just so you know, we rock a minivan with 140,000 miles on it, and it needed a front-end realignment about 40,000 miles ago. So as I'm driving us to church this morning, keeping this thing on the road, you know, Amy will look at me and go, should we get that looked at? Oh, no, absolutely. Even brand new cars do this, right? And it's shaking, and this is just at 30 miles an hour, right? What happens when I hit 70? Well, we can't hear each other. It's loud. And what happens when I let go of the wheel? Woo! Whoa! And you have to grab that wheel and pull it back. All right, we're good. I can't talk to you right now. I'm keeping the car straight. That's where we get this idea of alignment, because Christianity is realignment. So when a couple comes in and they'll say things, I always love when I get this subtle tone. We've just agreed to disagree. I'm sure you have, sunshine, but I'm not really feeling that in your tone. You're angry. You're frustrated. And I just love it. It's like, well, we don't get along here. And I need her to do this and him to do this and her to start thinking this way. And then, no, here's the gospel. Why don't we just bring your marriage back in line with it? Quit accepting her based on what she will or will not do. Quit accepting him based on what he will or will not do. It's the gospel. This is how and why we accept people. This is why a Jew can sit down and eat with a Gentile, because of Jesus. He goes on. I said to Cephas in front of them all, you are a Jew, and here's where we get the, but you want him to look like you. You are a Jew, yet you live like a Gentile and not like a Jew. How is it then that you force Gentiles to look like you, to take on and to follow Jewish customs? He says this is just not how it works. We receive people because of Jesus. So when you're thinking about compatibility and chemistry and relationships, there's really only one thing you need to think about and make it the priority of your character checklist. And it's found in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14. It's what we call the unequally yoked passage. Don't be yoked together with unbelievers. For what do righteousness and wickedness have in common? Or what fellowship can light have with darkness? And in our Devo cards that we do as a family, we have them here, and many of you are taking your kids to them. The Y is the yoke. And so we teach this to our kids. Again, we want to start early getting our kids to understand, Corinne, you may or may not marry a farmer. That's not the issue. You may or may not marry a Dixie Stampede server. right? You may do the person in the show. I mean, yeah, who knows? But the problem is we prioritize and we make competency or the type of work a person does the most important thing. The most important thing is, do they know Jesus? Do they walk with Jesus? Because when you're standing in a creek facing a moose, you want someone who knows the gospel, that can realign your marriage to it. You want someone who can sit down under biblical authority, under biblical community, and you can have someone tell you, your argument right now is petty. You think it's about sex, money, time, kids. It's not. You're not ortho-walking. You're not walking in line with the Scripture. This is why, right below, does this man or this woman know the gospel? Do they understand the gospel? Do they understand why they have been received by God and accepted by God? After that, right below that, I ask, do they submit to the authority? Do they understand, love, honor, and respect their parents? It's a big one, right? Because honoring parents, respect for authority begins at home. So you want someone that when your marriage faces a moose, you can sit down with someone in authority over you. This is so important as you look at character and relationship, and they can say, hey, here's the gospel. Here's where I see you going. Let's bring this back to the gospel and remind you. You know what the communion that we took today was? That's a realignment event. That's a realignment event. That's where we sit down, we take the elements together, and we remind ourselves why we're here. That's why Josh shared. We don't take this meal with contempt. We examine ourselves. Why? We want to make sure we're ortho-walking. We want to make sure we're straight in line with the gospel. So before we take the elements, our lives are aligned to it. This is why you want someone who understands this, not hopes, because that's the most miserable marriages I know are where a believer fell in love with an unbeliever. They decided to marry hoping for the best. So when they sit in counseling, when they sit with friends, when they try to understand how to make this marriage work, they're not centered on the gospel. And this is how we tell it to our kids. In the Old Testament, and this is this verse, in the Old Testament, God commanded that a donkey and an ox not be yoked together. Deuteronomy 22:10. Yoking is when two animals get hooked together to do a job. It was forbidden to yoke a clean and an unclean animal together. The Apostle Paul uses this imagery in this verse to teach that believers and unbelievers should not be yoked together. I think it's important to help our smaller children really understand this. We can have unbelievers as friends, right? Because Jesus was a friend of sinners, so we should have acquaintances and friends who are sinners, but not as partners. This is the big difference. If a believer partners with an unbeliever in marriage, there will be a constant struggle. Because baseline, here's the problem with compatibility today. With compatibility today, couples are using compatibility as baseline. They're saying we got to come back to what we have. We got to come back to what we have in common. They want to keep coming back to compatibility and chemistry. But in a marriage that thrives and in a marriage where a husband and wife who love the Lord are growing and thriving and finding deeper levels of intimacy, compatibility and chemistry are not baseline. The gospel is baseline. Jesus is baseline, and they keep coming back to him. And this is why Jesus said, I'm going to give you a brand new command. That to most people hearing this for the first time, Jesus said, they're not going to get this. But the disciples of Jesus will understand this, and you will be known. I love one another as I have loved you. Accept one another as I have accepted you. Not by works, not by the law, but because of my death on the cross. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. These are the great marriages. These are the best marriages. These are the marriages where husband and wife, both connected to the true and only source of life, are coming back to baseline, which is Jesus. Not personality traits, not commonality, shared experiences alone. All of that's great, but when we face the moose, we're coming back to Jesus.